Chapter 11. I fell asleep very quickly, but I woke up at 4 in the morning and couldn't go back to sleep. I tossed and turned almost 45 minutes before I decided to stop fighting it and get up and get dressed. I sat at the desk and worked on my paper for about an hour. I quit when I glanced out the window and saw the sky was turning purple and pink. I crept down the stairs without making a sound and grabbed the jacket on my way out. Even though it hadn't taken me long to get down the stairs and outside, the sky was already turning gold. The long grass that hugged the path to the stable was bending under the weight of the dew. Before long, it would be frost instead. Nicker was up when I got to his stall. He seemed excited to see me, even though his eyes weren't completely open. Then he yawned. It was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. I don't know why, but I guess I never really thought horses would yawn. I put the halter on him, and he followed me into the paddock. I'd like to think he followed me because he liked me, but I think it was probably had to do more with the fact that he wanted the bottle I was carrying. Head down, tail up. Head up, tail down. He yanked and pulled on the bottle, first shoving his head into me, then backing off a few steps. When the bottle was empty, he stood next to me, leaning against my side, blinking his eyes. He looked more than just satisfied. He looked happy, content. We were both learning how to enjoy that feeling at the ranch. Nicker and I watched the sunrise together. While I watched it, he sort of dozed for a few minutes, and then he ran around the paddock a bit. He'd kick up his back heels and then run as fast as he could, stopping abruptly to sniff a clump of thistles. Then he'd be off again, racing his shadow, and jumping out of his skin when a rabbit popped up in front of him. I enjoyed having the time alone, time I could use to think. I felt like I had been transplanted into a fairy tale world. I mean, here I was, at a great ranch, working with a guy who cared about me. Not because he had to, not because he would get anything from it, but for some other reason. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out why Mr. H wanted to help me. I was just glad that he did. I felt embarrassed about last night, but I didn't know what I could do about it. And although I had acted pretty awful, at least I had found out that even though Mr. H got lots of kids during the year, he didn't consider us just a bunch of faces. He really cared. I wanted to believe the fairy tale would last forever, but I knew better. Happy endings are only found in Hollywood, but that didn't mean my ending had to be bad. I probably wouldn't be able to stay with Mr. Hassler like I wanted to, but I could do something other than just go back home. I could go do something. I just didn't quite know what. Maybe my dad and I could work something out. We stayed out there for 20 minutes before I figured it was probably time to head back up to the house. When I called Nicker to me and started to lead him back to his stall, I realized there was nothing wrong with leaving him where he could stretch his legs and get exercise for the morning. I left him nickering at me over the paddock fence. I didn't see James's truck when I got to the house, so I slipped inside as quietly as I could. I didn't know what time it was or what time Mr. H got up, and I didn't want to be the one to wake him up. Then I heard his voice. I almost said good morning before I realized he was on the phone. He was talking quietly, probably trying not to wake me up. "Yeah, Frank, I'm sorry to wake you so early on a Saturday morning, but I need to talk to you about the kid." "Yes, Sean Parker." "No, no, he's doing fine work, and I really appreciate you helping me get him around the school's in-house policy. This is a new problem." "Well, his mother was admitted to the hospital last night." "No, well, look, I gotta make this quick, so how about you get the rest of the story by coming over here this afternoon?" "Yeah, it's pretty important." "Well, I think his father's planning a lawsuit. I kinda hit him last night." "No, not Sean, I hit his father." Yeah, me and my temper. But Frank, he was just standing there, calmly telling me that I shouldn't spend extra time on a worthless case like his son. I couldn't believe it either. And I've got this feeling Sean's mother isn't exactly. Mr. Hassler broke off abruptly as he turned around and saw me standing in front of him. Frank, can you come over this afternoon? I'd appreciate it. Yeah, I've got to go now. 12 o'clock. Bye." He hung up the phone slowly, never taking his eyes off me. I dropped the jacket over the back of the couch. "What should I start for breakfast?" I asked, heading to the kitchen. "Sean?" He reached out to stop me by putting his hand on my shoulder. "How much did you hear?" "Probably all of it." "I'm sorry. I really didn't want you to hear any of it." I shrugged. No big deal, I said, continuing on to the kitchen. What? Don't look so surprised. You don't really think that's the first time I've heard that, do you? He followed me into the kitchen and sat down at the table. He looked like he was at a complete loss. Of course, I said, rummaging through the fridge for milk and oranges. I haven't heard it from him. I haven't heard anything from him for years. Now I guess I know why. I poured 2 glasses of orange juice and sat them on the table. Mr. Hassler still didn't say anything. I dug the pancake mix out of the cupboard and went back to the fridge for the eggs. Sean, I looked at him. Come here, sit down, please. Let me get breakfast. Breakfast can wait, he cut in. Please sit down. I sat down. He closed his eyes briefly. I didn't want you to hear what your father said because I was afraid you might believe it. Now you say you've heard it a lot. Do you believe what you hear? Everyone else does. I'm asking if you do. It doesn't matter what I think when everyone else has already made up their minds. Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. Even when I believe I can do something, it doesn't matter. Okay, I believe I'm smart. I can do well in school, so I study for my test. Then I'm accused of cheating because I got an A. I like the research assignment, so I spend 4 hours writing the paper, and then I get asked who wrote it for me. I go out for sports, and I get cut because things have been stolen from the locker room, and I'm the only non-preppy, non-jock on the team, so I must have been the one doing it. It doesn't matter what I believe, not when everyone else already decided for me. He put his head in his hands. Oh God, you really are me all over again, he muttered. What? Sean, I grew up during the Depression. Things were bad for everyone, but they were really bad for my family. We had a history of being drunks, cheaters, thieves, and lazy bums who would never amount to a damn thing. My grandfather was that way. My father was that way. So were both of my older brothers. I decided I didn't want to be that way. He took a deep breath. I lived in a town of 400 people, and I spent my whole life trying to prove myself better than my family. In a town that small, it's not an easy task. I thought about that. My junior high had 600 students, and there were 6 junior highs in our district. To live where the entire town had only 400 people, that's a small town, I said. I bet everyone knew what kind of person you were going to be. They thought they knew, he corrected. I was out to prove them wrong. It sounds impossible. It felt impossible, he agreed. So many times I thought I couldn't do it. So many times I decided that maybe I should just quit and be what they wanted me to be. It would be easier. He shook his head. The small smile on his lips didn't reach his eyes. But then one day a set of diamond cufflinks were stolen. They belonged to the mayor. There were 6 of us in the town who had been working in his office, cleaning. We were rounded up. They started grilling me right away. I held my ground. They couldn't get any information out of us, so we were released. But small towns have their own way of doing unofficial trials, and I had already been tried and convicted. For the rest of the week, I could feel the town's hatred every time I walked down the street. I knew exactly how that felt. So anyway, a week later, they caught a kid trying to pawn the cufflinks in the next town. It turned out to be the mayor's own son. You're kidding. I'm serious. The next day, I was confused when the mayor called me and asked me to drop by his house. I went on my way to work. He apologized and said he had read me wrong, and that he had been doing it for a long time. Then he pulled $20 out and tried to hand it to me. Tried to? I leaned forward in my chair. You didn't take it? No, for 2 reasons. First, if I suddenly had money, people would question where it came from. Like, what did I steal this time? Second, I didn't want him thinking I could be bought. What do you mean, bought? I didn't want him thinking that just by giving me money, he could make everything better. I wasn't looking for money. I wanted to be, he broke off, searching for the word. Respected, understood, accepted? Yes, he said, nodding with a smile. All those things. What did he say when you didn't take the money? He asked me what I wanted to do with my life, since I was obviously struggling to stay on the straight and narrow path. He said that I was still on it, he knew that, but he also knew I was struggling. I told him all I was trying to do was hang on for another 2 years until I was 18, then I was going to enlist. Mr. H stopped for a drink of orange juice. He asked me if I really wanted to enlist. I said of course, because that was the only way I was going to get out of that town and have a chance to get somewhere in my life. Then he asked if I wanted to go now if I had a chance. But you were only 16. You didn't have that choice. That's what I thought. But he said he could pull some strings and get me in right away. When I went home that night, I told my family that I was going to leave the next week to go get a better job. My father laughed at me. It was an angry, scary laugh. He told me he was sick of me trying to act like I was better than the rest of them. We had a huge fight, and I slept in the back of the shed for the rest of the week. He sighed and smiled. I left town that Monday, and I've never looked back. I started laughing. So you were illegal in the army? Technically, yes, but the point is, Sean, that if you believe in yourself, it doesn't matter what others think. So what, you want me to go enlist? You've got an advantage. It's easier these days in a town this size to move to where people don't know you. Now it's easier to find a career with ways to advance that are outside of the military. You can do it, Sean. If you believe in yourself and you decide that's what you want to do. I sat quietly for a few minutes. I must not have looked convinced because he leaned forward and said softly, I lied. I did look back once. I only looked back because my mother had passed away and I wanted to pay my respects. Then I went to the town to see my father. He was still living in the same rundown house, only by that time it was more like a shack. I stayed there for 15 minutes. Mr. Hassler's voice dropped a notch, and he looked down at his feet. The whole time I was there, my father tried to belittle me, tried to make me feel worthless again. Understand, at this time I had been gone for 15 years. I was married and holding a steady job at Burlington. I left a $50 bill on the kitchen table for my father and I walked out. And on my way out of town, I suddenly realized something. He looked up at me. People had been putting me down all my life because they could tell I'd be something if I wanted to be. They didn't want me to succeed. That's why they made my life hell. If I could succeed where they didn't, then they were weaker than I was, so they tried to stop me. Sean, a lot of people can tell you can succeed. Some of them will try to stop you now from even trying. Don't let them. Come back in 20 years and be able to buy your father's company. Don't sink into what they think you are. I dropped my eyes to look at the floor. I didn't want Mr. Hassler to know how good that idea felt. I could do it. I could prove Mr. H right and my mother and father wrong, all at the same time. The kitchen door slammed and I jumped. Hey, where's breakfast? Here I am, running late and absolutely starving, and there's no breakfast. James sat down at the table as I got up. He looked at us. What's going on? Nothing, I said quickly. It was a late night, Mr. H explained. We got a phone call about 9 telling us Sean's mother is in the hospital. Oh, geez, I'm sorry to hear that, Sean, he said as I handed him some orange juice. Thanks. She gonna be okay? I shrugged. We don't know, Mr. H said. She was in critical condition, but they think she'll recover. Her kidneys failed. Oh, I started the pancakes. Well, I thought you and I could exercise 10 of the riding ponies today, and then get the other 10 tomorrow, Mr. H said briskly. And we'll have Sean start the cornfields this morning. I nodded. Then this afternoon, Sean, I want you to work with Nicker some more with the halter and start grooming him. James will show you which soft brush to use. This time I didn't even try to hold back a grin. Things were going to be okay. I could find the right track here. Mr. H would help me stay there.